Welcome on back, everyone, to the All Aussie Rules Footy podcast. This is episode 26, and this is our round 11 preview. Flying through the season, approaching the halfway mark, approaching the bye rounds for all teams. A lot going on. Before we jump into the previews for all of the 9 matches in round 11, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all of that stuff. Also, check me out on all my social medias. We've got Twitter, we've got Instagram, we've got Facebook, we've got TikTok, all of them. So go check them out. But let's just jump straight into the games this week. First up, on Thursday night, we're jumping across to a big game in Melbourne at Marvel Stadium. We've got the Bulldogs hosting Sydney. Massive game for the doggies here. Obviously, they've come off 2 good wins in a row. Now they go up against clearly the best team in the competition on current form, and a massive test for them. They get the home ground advantage. It's at Marvel Stadium, which isn't too dissimilar of a size from, in some ways, to the SCG, but it plays a lot different. But yeah, Bulldogs v Sydney Thursday night. Should be a good game. A chance for the doggies to show that they are really back and their season's going alright. Meanwhile, for Sydney, it's a chance for them just to continue on their fine form. They're absolutely dominating. They've only had the one blemish so far this season, which was back in round 5. No. I don't know, round 5 maybe, whenever they played Richmond at the MCG. I think we just forget that game though and continue on with the season, because outside of that, they've been outstanding. These two teams, they only played each other once last year. It was at the SCG. Sydney got the win by 2 points. 2022, the second time they played was at the SCG, which Sydney won that one comfortably by 53. Round 3, 2022 was the last time these two teams met at Marvel Stadium, and the doggies got that one by 11. And the last time Sydney beat the doggies at Marvel was the time before that, round 17, 2021. Sydney won that one by 19 points. So Sydney have won 3 of the last 4 between these two. Obviously, they've split the last 2 at Marvel Stadium, 1 each. If you go back even further than that, then they split the 2 before that as well. So history doesn't really tell us a whole heap, other than both teams definitely have a chance in this one. Sydney are obviously flying a lot more than they'd probably have in any of those other ones. Obviously, they did make the grand final in 2022. But I think this season, so far from what we've seen, they've been a lot more dominant than they were in 2022. Meanwhile, doggies, their season has been hit and miss. Their last couple of weeks have been very strong. So all of a sudden, we're thinking maybe they've found their mojo, but there's every chance that they will have that slip up any time now, where they just don't turn up one day. Will that be this week? I guess we'll wait and find out. Moving right along into having a look at the differences between the two teams. Both are very high-scoring teams. Number 1 and number 3 ranked teams in the competition. Both are very good defensively too overall. Bulldogs' numbers kind of get inflated by the fact that they have demolished a few teams. But they're 5th best defence, whereas Sydney are number 1 clearly. Well, not clearly, only just ahead in defence, but comfortably ahead in offence. So, hard to fault Sydney, but Bulldogs' numbers stack up pretty well as anybody does against Sydney. Forward efficiency, that's meant to say that Sydney is ranked 3, not 33. Both teams, once again, very consistent at that. Inside 50s, both teams do that very well. Clearance, both teams are very similar. And tackle differential, not massive difference. Sydney obviously number 2 ranked team in tackling, just behind Collingwood, and over the last few weeks they've certainly made some progress on pushing towards the number 1 tackling team as well, led by James Rowbottom in the middle. This Sydney midfield is absolutely dominant. They've been dominating all year. Heaney clearly looks like leading the Brownlow. If we were to have a live look at that, I would imagine he would be a few votes out in front after round 10. Goulden has been good on the wing. I don't think he's quite reached the heights that he got last year, but he's been very good. Chad Warner's taken his game to another level. He's been outstanding. Brodie Grundy in the ruck has been outstanding. So yeah, their whole midfield group is just absolutely firing on all cylinders. Meanwhile, if any team was going to put up a fight against them in the midfield, it's probably the Bulldogs. They are also very stacked in there. Obviously, Libba's not playing at the moment, but Ed Richards has come in over the last few weeks into the midfield group, and he's certainly playing very good football in there. Bont is obviously an outstanding player. He had a bit of a quiet week actually last week by his standards, but I'd expect to see him bouncing back to top form this week. And Adam Treloar, I think, has been a bit underrated this year in that he's been very consistent. He's had a ton of the ball, and he's actually using it very well for someone that's probably not well known for being the greatest disposer of the ball. He's been quite good this year. So I think if any team's going to match Sydney in the midfield, it's probably the Doggies, in my opinion. They'll try and hurt them back the other way because obviously the Sydney midfield do score a lot of goals. So maybe the Bulldogs can try and put some pressure the other way and force the Sydney midfielders to defend a bit more. If you look across the rest of the lineup outside of the midfield, I think the Bulldogs probably have the better defence and the better offence in just personnel-wise. Forward line, sorry. Defence line and forward lines, not actual team defence and such. But Sydney just rely on their midfielders to score goals, and it's worked for them so far. Obviously, Hayward's popped up with a few goals here and there, and Amadi gets a couple here and there, but they certainly get a lot more goals from the midfield than any other team. Whereas the Bulldogs have a lot of options down forward. Obviously, Norton, Darcy, Ugelhagen, and the like. And in defence, they've got some strong players back there too. So, if anyone was probably going to cause an upset on Sydney, I can see it being the Bulldogs at Marvel Stadium. If it was in Sydney, there's not a chance I'd be going anywhere near the Dogs, but there's just that chance that the best of the Bulldogs comes out on Thursday night, and the best of the Bulldogs is good enough to beat Sydney, in my opinion. We don't see the best of the Bulldogs too often, but if we get it this week, it should be a ripper game, and I can see it potentially going the Bulldogs' way. So that is a Thursday night football. Friday night is over in the West. We've got Fremantle hosting the Collingwood Magpies over at Optus Stadium. Friday night footy for the Dockers, a big game. They obviously got a win last week against St Kilda in Melbourne. Fremantle are actually undefeated in Melbourne this year. They've won 2 at Marvel and 1 at the MCG, I would like to say. So they've had a cracking start away from home. They've lost a couple at home. They obviously lost against West Coast at Optus Stadium. They lost 2 weeks ago to somebody else, I think, didn't they? Sydney, sorry. Yes, they lost to Sydney over there. So their season's a bit hit and miss, but they're 6-4, and sitting 9th on the ladder, so they don't have any major concerns in that regard. Defensively, they're playing very, very strong football. Offensively, they struggle to put the scores on the board, which on the most part is due to their inability to kick goals, because as you can see, they're ranked 17th in accuracy, and that's no surprise. On the last 2 weeks, they've kicked very, very poorly in front of goal. So if they tidy that up, all of a sudden they're probably kicking an extra 2-3 goals, maybe more, and all of a sudden their average is up 85 points a game and up in the middle pack of teams in terms of scoring. So they're not far off in that regard, and it could catch up. They could catch up very quickly because they definitely get the ball forward enough and they do enough with it when they're going forward. They just, that final execution is where they lack. These two teams, last two times they've played each other has been at the MCG, so not a great indication for this game. Collingwood did win them both comfortably. Round 10 2022 was the last time these two teams played at Optus Stadium. Both teams made finals that year. I believe Collingwood definitely did. They made their late run, and I'm pretty sure they played Fremantle in the... Yeah, they did, of course. They played the semi-final in 2022 against each other at the MCG, which Collingwood won. In round 10 when they versed each other at Optus Stadium, Collingwood also won that by 36 points, which was about the time that Collingwood really turned their season around in 2022. The time before that they played each other was 2020, which was obviously COVID year, a lot different football, but Fremantle won that one. So I don't think Collingwood travelling would be a major concern for them. They tend to travel reasonably well. They have one of the better records as far as Victorian teams go when leaving Victoria, but their injury list is certainly a concern. They've got 2 more debutants this week. They've got a lot of a changing of guard at the moment. Obviously, De Goey's back out of the team. He was a big in for them last week, and he's straight back out, so that will be interesting. But Nick Dacos has just been carrying Collingwood most of the season. The last few weeks, now that Collingwood's form has turned right around, you're starting to see the Pendleburys and Josh Dacos and John Noble even last week really step it up and lighten the load a little bit on Nick Dacos, but he was the one keeping their season alive early, and he's reaping the benefits of that over the last 3 or 4 weeks. Where this game is won or lost, probably the pressure game. Collingwood, up until 2 weeks ago, was clearly the number one team. Their last 2 weeks, they haven't been outstanding in that regard. Obviously, West Coast, they kind of absolutely smashed through most of the game, and then the second half was a bit of a snore fest because Collingwood were trying to get any more injuries and slowed the game right up, and that West Coast were quite happy for that to happen. So it'll be interesting to see if Collingwood can turn that back on, because they'll probably need to bring that in against Fremantle, who are a heavy handball team. They obviously have absolute guns in the midfield. Sarong, Fife, Brayshaw, who dominate the clearance game, which is not Collingwood's best part of their game. So I think we'll see Fremantle probably winning the clearances. Collingwood will be trying to put the pressure on and causing turnovers, because that's where they play their best football. It's just that high pressure, forcing turnovers and scoring going the other way. Another major difference between these two teams is the disposal efficiency. Fremantle are the number one ranked team in disposal efficiency in the league. Collingwood are nowhere near that. They've ranked 14th, and that is where they nearly lost the game last week. Collingwood, they were absolutely dominated in disposal efficiency. I think they went at about 69 and Adelaide was 76. The conditions should be no reason last week that they were anywhere below 72, 73. So to be at 69 was a bit of a concern for them. But they got the win and the 4 points, and they haven't lost since round 2. So it's hard to go against them, but Fremantle get the home game. The Collingwood injured list is a little bit of a concern, and I find it very hard to suggest that Fremantle are going to lose this one, even though, yes, Collingwood did beat them last time at Optus, but I think both teams are going very well at the moment, and I'd be very surprised to see the Dockers lose this one. We move on to Saturday football. We have a double Saturday afternoon game starting at 1:45. This is the North Melbourne Kangaroos hosting Port Adelaide down at Blunston Arena in Hobart. I don't think this is going to be the most anticipated game of the weekend. Very rarely this season will we see a North Melbourne game be highly anticipated, but it is what it is. The last two times these two teams have met, it has been down at Blunston the last two seasons, both times in round 9, so an extra couple weeks later this time in round 11. No surprise to say that Port Adelaide have won both of those games convincingly by 70 points pretty much both times. So, yeah, it's hard to say based on that any reason why Port Adelaide wouldn't win this one. They're certainly the better team out of these two at the moment. North Melbourne are still 0-10. They did win 2 quarters against the Bombers, which is a little positive for them, but it's not enough at current point. They're 0-10 for the year. Port Adelaide got out of jail last week with a second half comeback and last second victory over Hawthorn. Wasn't a convincing win by any means, but at the end of the day, they get the 4 points. They go to 7-3, and they're currently 4th on the ladder, with going into a game that they should win again. So you'd imagine going after this weekend, they're going to be 8-3 and a top 4 team, which if you had have given them that at the start of the year to be 8-3 and comfortably in the top 4, I would imagine, take it. Yeah, they've dropped a couple games that perhaps they shouldn't, and meanwhile they've won a couple that maybe they might not have thought they were going to, but their season's going along all right. Is there a point in looking at where this game's won and lost? I think it's, unless Port Adelaide absolutely fall apart, this match is won before it even starts. Kangaroos can't score enough. They concede way too much. Port Adelaide have a team that can score very quickly as well, so I would not be surprised to see them kick 23, 24 goals in this match. Port Adelaide's forward efficiency is outstanding. When they get it forward, which they do get it forward a lot, they tend to score. If they kick straight, it could be an absolute belting on the cards. I wouldn't be surprised to see this end up being 140, 150 to 60. Just every stat, basically. Port Adelaide smash North Melbourne here. They dominate clearances, they dominate tackles, they dominate inside 50s. Their forward efficiency's better, they score more, they defend better. It's just very hard to see this being North Melbourne's first win of the year. Where that will come, anyone's guess at the moment. I guess hoping that maybe when they play either Richmond or West Coast, they can sneak one, but even that I'm not convinced of at the moment. They're not showing enough in my eyes to warrant that, but we'll cross that bridge when it comes. At the moment, Port Adelaide comfortably in this one. Also starting at the same time is Carlton GWS, and this is one of the more important games of the round. There's a couple big games this round, important games for multiple teams. This one is one of them, and the one straight after this at 4:35 is also a massive one. But we'll look at this one first. Carlton, Gold Coast at Marvel Stadium. Both teams 6-4. Gold Coast 8th on the ladder, Carlton 10th. Slightly different seasons so far. Carlton obviously started the season really well. They've fallen apart a little bit. Not the end of the world, but they've certainly not had the best 6 or 7 weeks. Meanwhile, Gold Coast, their season has been fine. they've won every home game, they've lost every away game, so they've played 10 matches, they've had 6 home games, 2 of them in Darwin, they've won them all, and they've had 4 games away from the Gold Coast and lost them all. So, based on that, you'd probably say Carlton win this. It's hard to go against Carlton, even though they were pretty thoroughly smashed last week in Sydney, but yeah, it's just hard to go with them based on that. But the fact that I'm not fully convinced on Gold Coast. Last week they were outstanding. They dominated Geelong. They did have the acclimatisation to Darwin a bit better. It'll be interesting to see them coming down into the cold, wintry Melbourne, how they play there. It is under the roof, but it will still be very cold. Looking at the history, they haven't played at Marvel Stadium since 2021, which Gold Coast won, but both teams are completely different since then. Since then, they've played 3 games, 2 of them on the Gold Coast, which they have split, and at the MCG in last year, that is, round 14, Carlton won that one by 59 points. So, based on just most things, I think Carlton are the better team in Melbourne. If this was on the Gold Coast, I'd be tempted to go, very, very tempted to back in the Suns based on what we've seen. But I think travelling down, it's just going to be a tough one for them. Both teams stack up pretty evenly in many regards. I think the major issue for Carlton is their inability to get the ball forward at the moment. A few weeks back they were really dominant in clearances. They've kind of dropped off over the last month maybe in that regard, and that's hurt them a little bit. I want to see a little bit more pressure from the Carlton, especially their midfield. They have a very, very strong midfield, Walsh, Newman, Cripps, and they're all very good offensively, very crucial players offensively. I want to see them turn it up a little bit defensively and affect the opposition's ability to score a bit better. They're conceding some high scores, like they're averaging 90 points against so far this year. They conceded a lot against Sydney last week. This is completely off the cuff, but I would say no team in the last 10 years has made a grand final when conceding 90 points a game. It's just not the recipe for strong football and finals football. Like, they probably still make the 8. They should make the 8 still. They're a good enough team for that. But if you're conceding that amount going into finals, it's going to make it hard to win a final if you can't stop the opposition from scoring. This game could go either way. I'm going with Carlton just because it's in Melbourne. Although I think Carlton would be better if it was at the MCG. But even still, I think they just win. A lot different game for Gold Coast this week than they've had the last 2 weeks up in Darwin, where the ball was slippery, in under the roof. It's going to be more focused on skills, which Gold Coast are fine with their skills, but just after 2 weeks of slippery footy, where they've played outstanding, it will be a bit of a change, and I'm going to go with Carlton. The other massive game of Saturday afternoon, this one kicking off at 4:35 at GMHBA Stadium down in Geelong. This one should be a cracker and is very important for both teams again, just like the previous one. Geelong 7-3. After winning their first 7, they've lost their last 3, and they need to stop the skid, because their season was looking peachy a few weeks back, and it certainly is not looking quite so good now. GWS, another team, started very well. They've gone 1-4 in the last 5 weeks, and lost a few games that perhaps they would have been expected to win. But they just haven't been performing the last month, really. They lost to the Doggies last week at home. They lost to Bombers the week before in Melbourne. Going down to the Cattery is not an easy task. Obviously, the Cats did lose there 2 weeks ago against Port Adelaide. But, what can we say about this one? Last year, they did play each other down at the Cattery, also in round 11, so very similar time of the year. And GWS did win it. So, there's hope for them in that. Obviously, Geelong last year did not have a very good season. They didn't make the finals last year, and GWS did win that one. The year before they played at Manuka Oval, and Geelong won that one comfortably. That was the year Geelong won the premiership. 2021 obviously was a bit of a COVID year. They played in the semi-final, and Geelong won that one over in the West. And they also played down at the Cattery in round 21, which GWS won that. So GWS have actually won the last 3 times they've played each other at GMHBA, which is a little bit of an anomaly. Jeez, I can speak real well. But I wouldn't read too much into that. Teams are probably different in regards to last year. Geelong was a bit of a down year. The 2021 one is a little surprising because Geelong obviously had a very good 2021. They just lost in the grand final to Richmond. I can't remember back to 2019. That was pre-COVID times. My memory doesn't really serve me too well back there. But an important game for both teams. Both teams need to win this just to kind of settle their form a little bit and settle their team and get some confidence back into them before mid-season buys coming up over the next month. If you compare the two teams, both are not too dissimilar in their scoring patterns. Obviously, Geelong ranked second and GWS fourth offensively, so very similar there. Defensively, there's only a few points in it. Geelong slightly worse defensively at the moment on average, but nothing too much to be concerned. Both typically lose inside 50 count and just rely on their efficiency and accuracy, mainly their accuracy. Both teams are very good in front of goal. Neither team are overly great with disposals. Clearances, both teams lose clearances. So very kind of similar in many ways, at least numbers-wise for both teams. Geelong play more of a kick game, whereas GWS are one of the more handball-y teams, run and overlap through the midfield, which try to run teams off their feet a little bit in that regard, and it kind of works running in the wave. It's always the orange tsunami wave, and it has typically worked for them. The last month, though, they've certainly been broken down. Lockie Whitfield was okay last week. He was improved than he had been the previous 2 weeks, but I think teams found that if you shut down Whitfield in the back line, it kind of stifles them a bit because they use that as his kick as the one to really open up the field and allow them to run and handball the ball the rest of the way. I think a major area of concern for GWS is Toby Green's output hasn't been as good as it was last year. They've had some improvements. Jesse Hogan's obviously had a great season, but if Toby Green can get his form up a bit, he's played 2 good games and the rest have all been average. If he can turn his form around, I think we'll start seeing GWS win some games again. Geelong, I think 7-3 is about what we kind of see them. I think when they were 7-0, they were certainly above what would be predicted. They'd won a few tight ones. So now that they're 7-3, it's more now, they're a top 4 team, probably in that 3 to 6 range on the ladder, and that's probably where I think it feels right for them at the moment. Because yes, they were winning games. I don't think they were outstanding in any or many of them. Whereas now they've kind of been caught out a couple times. It feels a bit more where they should be. Who wins this one? You can't go against Geelong at the Cattery very often. However, as we've mentioned, GWS have had quite a bit of success down there. So I wouldn't write GWS off, but their last few weeks has been a bit disappointing, as has Geelong's. We then move on to Saturday night football, the standalone game, and it's Dreamtime at the G. Typically one of the best nights on the AFL season. A great celebration of what the First Nationers have done in this country, and this unfortunately might not be the best game to really celebrate that. Richmond's last month has been atrocious. Their last 2 weeks has been far from acceptable as an AFL team. Yes, I know they've got lots of injuries, they've got a lot of players out, but it's been very tough to watch. Obviously 2 weeks ago they lost by 91 points to the Bulldogs. Then they came out last week up at the Gabba and lost by 119 points to Brisbane, and now they go to the MCG and play Essendon, who have their tails up and are absolutely flying, and you'd have to say it's hard to see Essendon not winning this one by at least 50 points, but maybe a lot more, unless a different Richmond comes out, which we all hope to see, but I'm not overly confident on that. Obviously, they play this time each year for Dreamtime at the G. Typically, the last couple of years it's been round 10, but it's always in that round 10 to round 13 sort of time frame. Last year, Essendon won that one by a point in an absolute ripper. 2022 in the Dreamtime game, Richmond won that one by 32 points. And then they played again at the MCG in round 23 that year. And Richmond won that one as well comfortably. So Richmond have had quite a decent amount of success against Essendon over recent years. But this is a different Essendon. Well, it's slightly improved Essendon. In my head, I see Essendon as maybe 3 to 4 goal better team than they were last year, which will be enough for them to easily play finals. You look at them last year, round 17, they were 5th on the ladder. Injuries hit them and a real bad spate of form hit them, and they fell apart in that last 6 weeks of the season. But a 4 or 5 better team than that, a 4 or 5 goal better team than that, sees them all of a sudden in the finals contention quite comfortably. At the moment, they're second on the ladder. I can't see a world where they're not second on the ladder after maybe round 14, based on what we've seen so far. And yeah, that's kind of where it is. Looking at the numbers, Essendon's defensively is blowing out the last few weeks. It's got out to 104 points per game, when only a month ago it was down in the 90s. Essendon, offensively, 84.5 points a game is very much respectable. It's good enough. Defensively, they probably want to tighten up a little bit, but it's not too big of a concern. They're obviously very good in front of goal, which helps them. They get the ball forward a lot, which obviously creates lots of chances. They're good in the clearances, and they are very good at tackling. So I think Essendon are going to get their hands on the ball first a lot. They're going to get the ball out of the middle a lot. If they convert their opportunities, they are going to walk away with this one quite comfortably, in my opinion. Game number 7 of the weekend is on Sunday. This one's Hawthorn v Brisbane at Marvel Stadium, which is a slightly interesting ground for these two teams to meet. They typically have played a lot of games down in Launceston at Utah Stadium, In fact, if you look at it, their last 10 meetings, 5 of them have been at Utah Stadium. So, historically, they have played a lot down there. Interestingly, Hawthorn don't go to the Gabba too often. They haven't been there since 2019 to play Brisbane. They would have played games there, no doubt, during COVID times, but just not against Brisbane. But yeah, 2019, 2018 and 2016 were the last 3 times that they've been up to the Gabba. And they haven't played at Marvel against each other since at least 2015. So a massive amount of time between that. So can we look at the history too much? Probably not. Interestingly, last year Hawthorn did beat Brisbane at the MCG by 25 points. In what is one of the wildest stats of 2023, Hawthorn did beat both grand finalists. I can't remember exactly how many wins Hawthorn got for the year, but it was about 6, and 2 of those wins were against grand final teams. So Hawthorn probably have the wood on Brisbane historically. Look at it, the last time Brisbane beat Hawthorn was 2019 down at Launceston. However, they do play each other in Melbourne or Tasmania a lot, so Brisbane just don't get home games against Hawthorn for whatever reason. One of the weird things of the, I guess, AFL schedule. Hawthorn's form is quite good. They're 3-2 over the last 5 weeks, and definitely could be 4-1. If they had just held on last week against Port Adelaide, they played an outstanding game and just kind of fell over at the finish line. Brisbane's form has certainly improved. They won by 119 points last weekend, so their confidence should be up and about. Week before, they obviously drew against Adelaide, who has also shown quite good form of late. So their form's looking good. Hawthorn's form's looking good. This should be a good game, I think. Sunday afternoon at Marvel. Offensively, obviously, Brisbane are great. Even defensively, Brisbane are pretty good overall. I think in another world, they could well be 7-3, maybe even 8-2, based on what we've seen them do this year. They just haven't quite bought their best. They've let themselves down with some goal kicking and some just lapses in games. Like, I take you all the way back to round 3 or 4, whenever it was that they played Collingwood on Easter Thursday. Their second quarter was absolutely dominant. That was probably one of the most dominant quarters of football played this season. And they did get a little bit of reward for it, but nowhere near as much as perhaps they should have. And in the end, that cost them the match. And that's not the only time that's happened. It's happened quite a few times this year, especially early in their season. You look at opening round, when they played Carlton. They kicked 7 goals in the first quarter and it looked like game over. And then they just lapsed for most of the rest of the game, especially the 3rd, 4th quarters. Mainly the 3rd quarter they lapsed completely and Carlton got back into it, and then all of a sudden it was just an arm wrestle in that last quarter. So in another world, their season could be absolutely flying. They could be well and truly in the top 4. The fact that they're 12th on the ladder with the start that they've had is a little bit of a danger sign for other teams, because they go down to Melbourne and beat Hawthorn here. All of a sudden they're 5.5 wins from 11 matches. There's no reason to believe that they won't have a reasonable second half of the year. Probably unlikely to be able to get into the top 4 from where they are. Not impossible though, but they certainly can make finals, and I would not want to be going up against them anywhere in the finals. They're a very dangerous team. You got to remember that they were only a kick away from winning a grand final last year. On to game number 8 of the weekend. Over at the MCG straight. Well, actually, it will start before the Hawthorn game finishes. But right at the end of that one is Melbourne hosting St Kilda. Interesting game, this one. Melbourne obviously coming off a loss to West Coast last week. Their season continues to be an absolute mystery to most people. Meanwhile, St Kilda, their season is falling apart quite quickly, in my opinion. They're 3-7 on the year and 1-4 over the last 5 weeks, and I don't know the last time I saw them put together a decent amount of football that was worthy of being a decent team. To be honest, their form's been quite atrocious. They were okay at times against Fremantle, but only okay. Overall, Freo looked the winner most of the night. Week before, down in Launceston against Hawthorn, they were quite comfortably beaten by one of what is a lower ranked team on the ladder. And yeah, their current form is bad. Meanwhile, Melbourne, they show us signs that they are still one of the best teams, and then the next week they go and lose. It's happened multiple times this year. They obviously, week one, you forgive their loss against Sydney. They went over and beat both Adelaide and Port Adelaide in Adelaide. So they had 2 massive wins for them. But then they've lost to Brisbane in Melbourne, which Brisbane are a good team, but weren't in great form, and it was at the MCG, so you kind of put your money on Melbourne in that situation. They obviously lost to West Coast, and then I can't think of who they played in the middle of that, but they certainly won it, I'm pretty sure. I might be completely off my brain. Did they beat Geelong, maybe? I don't know. No, they didn't at all. I can't even think of who they played in that week. But yes, so their season's up and down all the way. And trying to catch them at the moment is about as hard as it is to catch the Bulldogs. Actually, they lost that week too. Sorry, they lost to Carlton by a point after giving away a lead and coming right back. So their last little bit is all of a sudden a little bit of a concern, because their last win was 3 weeks ago against Geelong. They beat them by 8 points, so that was a good win, and then they followed it up with a couple bad losses. So where are they sitting? They need to win this game, basically. Not life or death, because I mean they're still sitting 7th. They lose this, they're still 6-5, but this is a game they should win, and you'd expect them to win. Will it happen? I guess we'll wait and see. Both teams probably focus a lot on defence, or at least restricting scores based on what we've seen so far, so I wouldn't imagine it'll be a high scoring game. Also, Sunday afternoon at the MCG is not a common time slot for Melbourne. They tend to get a lot of night games, so it'll be interesting to see how they play the G on a Sunday afternoon. Their numbers just aren't great this year, in my opinion. They're 6-4, which isn't terrible, and in all likelihood they're going to be 7-4. I'm still not convinced that they're a team that's going to be pushing towards top 8. Their best is good. They've let a lot of games slip already this year, and it's going to be hard for them, in my opinion, to turn that into a top 4 position this year. But I could be wrong. We'll wait and see what happens in that regard. These two teams going up against each other. Last year they played at Marvel Stadium. Melbourne won that one reasonably convincingly, 20 points. 2022 they played at the MCG. Melbourne won that one even more convincingly by 40 points. Marvel Stadium 2021 they played each other and Melbourne won that one as well. So you got to go back to 2020 for the last time St Kilda beat Melbourne at the MCG. You can't see Melbourne losing this. At Marvel, I think it might be different. Melbourne probably aren't as good at Marvel, but at the MCG you can't go against Melbourne in this one, I don't think. One final game of round 11 is the final game, Adelaide West Coast over in Adelaide. Should be an entertaining game, I think, this one. Both teams not flying. Both teams doing okay. Adelaide's form is probably better than it suggests. 2 wins, 2 draws, and 2 wins, 2 losses, and a draw. Sorry, in the last 5 weeks. West Coast obviously 2 and 3 in the last 5 weeks. Adelaide probably the better team, more consistent team. Their season could be going a lot better than it is. They obviously only just lost last week against Collingwood by less than a kick. That was 4 points. You go back even further. We'll just have a quick look at their season because it has been a lot of close games for them in so far this year. Obviously, round one, they lost by 6 points to Gold Coast. They got beaten convincingly by Adelaide and Fremantle. They just 15 points to Melbourne. They won by 2 points over Carlton. Then they lost by 3 points to Essendon, and that was the controversial finish. They then beat North Melbourne. They beat Port Adelaide. They drew with Brisbane, and then they lost by 4 points to Collingwood. So it's not impossible to see them being at least 5 and 5 at the moment. Maybe even 6 and 4 potentially if things had gone their way. So I certainly wouldn't write them off in any match. Certainly not at Adelaide Oval. Neither team here scores great. Adelaide tend to struggle a little bit more with that, but West Coast either defend very efficiently or they concede a little bit of a high score. So it kind of depends on maybe it's just opposition related and nothing more. But they overall, like West Coast last week, defended really well, mainly due to their good offense, probably. But then the week before, Collingwood kind of blew them away, and Collingwood only kicked 1 goal in the last quarter, but they'd done almost 100 points in the first 3, so it's a bit of a hit and miss, I think, with them, which is completely understandable. They're a very young and developing team, and you kind of expect that. So that's kind of fine for them. Who wins this one is anyone's guess. I'd go with Adelaide. It's at Adelaide Oval. They West Coast, while they beat Melbourne last week, I wouldn't be convinced that they're going to be capable of beating Adelaide in Adelaide. Last year they played both at Adelaide Oval and Optus Stadium. Round 13 at Adelaide Oval, Adelaide won that by 122 points. So I'm sure a lot of the players will remember that one. Then they went over to Optus Stadium and they won that one by 50. 2022 at Adelaide Oval in round 12, Adelaide won that by 30 points, and then they went to Optus Stadium and won again by 16 points. So you've got to go back to 2021 for the last time West Coast won. That was at Adelaide Oval by 40 points. So historically, the last 2 years, Adelaide have been the better team. But West Coast, you can't completely write off. They're not terrible at Adelaide Oval. And, I mean, they show really good signs. Harley Reid out of the middle is outstanding. I'm not sure if Elliot Yeo's back yet or not. If he is, that would be huge for them. Obviously, Waterman, that's a weird way to pronounce his name. Waterman is an absolute gun up forward. He's having a great season. He's equal leading Coleman medal at the moment. And I'm secretly rooting for him to get the Coleman. I think it would be great for West Coast. It would be great for him, and it would be great for the competition. So I'm going Adelaide in this, but not by as much as I would have thought about a month ago. Moving on to, that's all the games, so we'll have a quick look at my tips for the round, and then we'll have a quick chat about what's happening in my world and the world of All Aussie Rules, and then we will finish up the episode. So, my tips this weekend. I've gone and upset on Thursday night at the moment. I'll probably change it 16 times between now and opening bounce. but I'm going for the upset. Based on what I've just said before when we were discussing the game, if anyone's going to beat Sydney, I think it's the Bulldogs. I don't know what it is. I think it's the midfields. Bulldogs have a team that can match them in the midfield, in my opinion. And the forward line and defence line, I give the edge slightly to the Dogs. So I think if they can at least match them in the midfield and maybe force the Warners and the Isaac Heaney's to work a little bit harder going backwards, it might help, and they might be able to do it. There's also the slight chance, though, that the Bulldogs turns up that came up against Essendon and got absolutely destroyed. That night, Bulldogs moved the ball well up until halfway between the halfway line and the forward 50, and then they just kind of ran out of whether they ran out of options or they made the wrong choice or what it was. The forward move would just break down every time. It happened all night long, and they lost by 50 points. So that Bulldogs could come back out, but the Bulldogs we've seen the last 2 weeks, I think, is capable of beating Sydney. I'll probably change my tip 300 times between now and then. But at the moment, I'm just going the Bulldogs by 5 points. I don't know why. Friday night, Fremantle have beaten Collingwood. I think the injuries are just too much for Collingwood to continue winning, especially all the way over at Optus Stadium. Next up, North Melbourne hosting Port Adelaide. Port Adelaide should win this comfortably. Possible to see North Melbourne winning games at the moment. Carlton to beat Gold Coast, purely based on the fact that it's in Melbourne. Both teams have an important game. Gold Coast need to win a game on the road, and Carlton need to get a little bit of form back into their football. But I've gone Carlton by 30. Geelong GWS, once again, both teams really desperate for a win here. I've gone Geelong by 5 just because it's down at the Cattery. As we have mentioned, GWS are good at the Cattery. That should be no real major issue for them, but I've just gone Geelong by 5 points. Not with any air of confidence, because both teams are kind of in a little bit of a slump. Dreamtime at the G. No way can you tip Richmond based on what you've seen the last 2 weeks. They've lost by a lot of points over the last 2 weeks. 210 points combined over the last 2 weeks, and even more if you keep adding weeks onto that. Essendon are flying. I've got them by 75 in this. I think Richmond probably show up a little bit better than they have over the last fortnight here, but you couldn't tip them. Not in 100 blue moons. Hawthorn, Brisbane. I'm going with my belief that Brisbane is still a good team. I think they're better than their record says, and I think they'll show that here. Hawthorn are certainly better than what many expected and many saw in the first month of their season, but it's a tough matchup against Brisbane, and I think Brisbane just sneak over the line in this one. Not by much. I think Hawthorn will put up another good fight. Melbourne St Kilda, there's no way you can tip St Kilda. Melbourne probably win by more than 20, to be honest. I probably think they might win by 30 or 40. St Kilda just haven't shown enough for the last 6 weeks, in my opinion. Their season has got away from them. They played finals last year, but it's very hard to see them playing finals this year. Melbourne, their season's up and down, but I think they're the better team. And then the final game of the week, Adelaide, I think, win by about 4 goals over West Coast. It should be a good game. Hopefully we see some more Harley Reid highlights. Hopefully Waterman kicks 4 or 5 goals and Adelaide just get over the line. Unfortunately, no Rankin, which makes the game a little bit less exciting because he's great to watch, but he'll be back in a month or so, and Adelaide hopefully will get a couple wins in that time and keep their season alive. That is all my tips for round 11 of the AFL season. Coming up this weekend, obviously there will be the footy games. We'll be back on Monday with another potty reviewing all of the round 11 games. So check that out. It will be Monday night live on on Spotify and YouTube. Don't forget to follow my socials, my Twitter, my Instagram, my TikTok, my Facebook. We release Team of the Week each week. We release Power Rankings. Will be live tomorrow. There's on my TikTok, I post a 1 minute video after each game, just wrapping up the game. So don't forget to check all them out. I appreciate all the support that I get. Tell your friends about me if you enjoy my content, and yeah, we'll be back on Monday for the next episode. Thanks again, and I'll catch you then.